Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 17 of the video series where I critique and process your image. In this episode, we're going to process this image of the lion taken by Beverly. It's a really cool shot, and I think we'll have a lot of fun processing it. Now, actually, before I do this though, just let me answer a couple questions that have cropped up. Someone mentioned that I seem to be overly concerned about noise in an image that maybe isn't there, or maybe it isn't as bad as I make it out to be. And I do admit I am very, very, very concerned about having noise in my image. Now, there's a few reasons for that. One reason is it's kind of my style to have a low noise, high detailed image. That's what I like to shoot, and that's kind of what I'm known for. So I really am concerned about noise. And also, I think part of that is because of the way I was developing as a photographer when I was younger. A long time ago, when I shot film, I shot a lot of images for stock agencies, and I actually had an agent in New York, and I'd actually get assignments. And usually, when I received an assignment or whatever, the instructions were that I had to use Kodachrome 25 for the shot. And those of you not familiar with that, that is a slide film that was made by Kodak, and it's literally it had no grain at all, but it was ISO 25, so it was a super slow film, but it had no grain. And the reason is the 35 millimeter negative still was relatively small compared to some other formats that were available at that time. We had 5x7 cameras were relatively common, with a negative that was 5 inches by 7 inches. But I digress. Anyways, most of these assignments we had to use 35 millimeter equipment, and we shot Kodachrome 25 because you never knew your image might be used on a billboard or it might be used on the side of a bus, and it really couldn't have noise. It just couldn't have grain at that time in the image. So it's kind of ingrained in my DNA from that, those early developmental stages as a photographer that I create images that don't have any noise in them. So that is me, all right? But with that said, if you ever have the opportunity to sell an image and it's going to be blown up really, really large, you should learn these techniques on how to remove the noise from your image. Because if you'll see this image here. I could see there's a lot of noise up in here. When we really start processing it, that noise, if you blow this up to a billboard size, if the zoo here wants to use this image in an advertising campaign and they put it on a billboard or a side of a bus or something, those that noise is going to be the size of silver dollars, and it really will detract from the image. So you have to learn how to control it. So that is really the reason why I'm so concerned about noise. And now I know I mentioned it in at least one other video, and if I don't mention it in every video, please understand that that's just me. All right. If you like noise, if you like an image that's a little grainy, a little bit got that grit to it, that's your style. By all means, pursue it. I'm not saying what I'm doing is the right objective only way this should be done. It's very subjective, and you should process your images the way they suit you and the way they fit your personality and the way you want to express yourself through your photography. So, just take what I do as just a way to learn something, learn how to get rid of noise in an image in case you ever need to, even though that might not be your exact style. Now, the other thing that came up in the conversation is that a lot of people aren't seeing the noise that I'm seeing, and that's possibly because of the resolution of the video. So, one thing I just want to point out, if you're on YouTube and you're looking at YouTube videos, over here in the lower right-hand corner of the video, you'll see a little gear, and right now it has HD in it. If I click on that, you could see that the quality of this image or this video is at 720p. And if I click on that now, you can see it's set to auto. That means that YouTube is judging how fast my internet is and giving me a resolution that they think will stream smoothly. Now, when I upload these videos, I upload them at very high resolution. So I actually watching this at 720p isn't the highest resolution available. You could go all the way up to 1440p. So you may have to do that in order to see maybe what I'm seeing that's really small in the frame or in the image. So just keep that in mind. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is in my last video, I processed this image, and this was the original, and I processed it like this. And a couple people mentioned, boy, I think I would have liked that vertical, and I got to admit that that never crossed my mind to crop this vertical. And I'm always saying when you're out you're taking photographs that you should work the scene, and I say that over and over, work the scene, work the scene, and that could be applicable to post-processing as well, that it didn't cross my mind to crop this vertical. But at times, and this happens actually all the time, I'll come back to an image that I processed on Monday, but I'll come back to it on Thursday, and I'll have a whole different idea how to crop it or how to process it, and I go in a whole different direction, reprocessing the image. And not only have I done that with images I've just processed a few days apart, I've done that with images I've taken years apart. I mean, recently I reprocessed a few images that I took at the Toronto Zoo like 6 years ago. So my point is, not only are we working the scene, I think when we're out there in the field taking the photographs, we're actually going to work that photograph when we're post-processing. And it may not occur to you right when you're sitting down processing the image for the first time. And I think the reason for that is most often when we go out taking photographs, we're taking probably at least 100 for just an afternoon of photography. And when you come home with 100 images, it's difficult to sit there and dwell on one image so long and crop it all different ways and make it look all different looks with your post processing. You kind of do it the one way that was set in your brain that first hit you, and then maybe a few days later you revisit it and you'll think of something else, or maybe a year later you'll revisit it and think of something else. So that's a different way of working the scene. You're working the scene in post production. And I definitely say that that is something to think of. If you don't revisit images, if you just process them once and the folder is closed forever, you don't go back to it, go back to them and check them out and see if you could reprocess them in a different way that might be better. You never know. And one final thing is about working the scene. Every now and then I get emails about that. And I discovered something recently, just I don't know, 2 days ago. I went to Rochester, which is like an hour and a half drive away from where I live. Rochester, New York, and I went there and met my sister-in-law there, and we took some pictures. She brought me to this place, High Falls, which I've never been to before, and we took some pictures. Well, I had a problem with at the time I thought was with my camera. Every picture I took was overexposed by like 4 stops, no matter what I set the aperture at, shutter speed at, whatever, it was overexposed. But that's not the point. When later on I got home and I saw her pictures that she took there, and she's a great photographer. And when I saw her pictures, she took pictures that didn't even occur to me to take. Didn't even pop into my brain that I should take that angle, that wall, that whatever. It didn't even think about it. And I've come to realize is that a lot of times when I say work the scene, it's easier than said than done. You go to a place and you take pictures and you might work the scene, but if you come back a second time, a third time, a fourth time, then other great images start materializing in front of you, and you'll be able to take some better pictures. And I find that here in Buffalo, I go to the same place over and over and over, and somehow I manage, without even thinking about it consciously, I manage to take a different look at that scene and photograph it slightly differently than I was last year. So my sister-in-law lives in Rochester and has lived there her entire adult life and has been to High Falls dozens of times. So she knows the place. She's taking pictures there over and over and over. So she has worked the scene for several years. So Yes, when I say work the scene, it might be easier said than done, but if you have the opportunity to keep going back to a place and photograph it over and over and over, you'll end up taking better pictures overall. So just wanted to throw that out there and say that I am aware of that, and I hope that helps everyone think about their photography a little differently. Now, I apologize to Beverly. I've been blabbing and blabbing and blabbing, and we haven't even looked at her image yet. I like the image a lot. It's a little bit underexposed, but this is sometimes what happens when we're out photographing, especially wildlife, even in a zoo. It's overcast, it's dark. Our equipment is just so good, and we just can't like stop down enough to get, the image properly, perfectly exposed, or we can't zoom in enough to really frame the thing perfectly. Now, in this case, she framed it fine, but you get my idea. And this is something we have to deal with in post-production. And as I look at the image, I think it's great. I think it's really nice. She shot it at 1/640th of a second, f/5.6, ISO 3200. It was at 375 millimeters. Now there was a little wiggle room here. Uh, I think you could have went down to ISO 1600. You would have then shot still at f/5.6. You would have been at 1/320th of a second, which I think you probably would have been able to handhold just fine at 375 millimeters. Now, with that said, the image would still be slightly underexposed, but when you're shooting at ISO 1600, it's going to have less noise in the image than at ISO 3200. And you'll see there's a lot of noise in this image when we start processing it. So that's something to think about. Typically if I am in a zoo and let's say I'm taking a picture of the tiger and I take shots of the tiger, I look at my settings, and then I look at the image and I see how it's looking on the back of the camera, and my settings look fine for the tiger. And then if I walk over to the lion enclosure and I take a couple shots of the lions, then I'll look at my settings again because the light might be different in that enclosure. The lions, of course, are different colors, different tones, so the exposure is going to be different. So when I go over and take a look at the lions, maybe I have to increase the ISO a little bit because my shutter speed all of a sudden is a little too slow. So it's always something you're always doing from enclosure to enclosure, even from different shots. You might get the lion over on the left side of the enclosure, then you're getting the lion over on the right, and you're going to have an entire different exposure for that lion than the other lion. So it's something you always have to be conscious of, and you always have to be looking at your camera. Chimping is what they say. Uh, but you chimp at the beginning, meaning right when you get to the enclosure, take a shot or two, look at it, do any adjustments, take another shot, look at it, make sure it's fine, then just go on and just concentrate on taking good images from that enclosure. Then do it all over at the next enclosure. Don't chimp every shot. All right, now we're going to process this image. And now again, like I said, that's only a suggestion about the ISO. I'd bring that down. So we're going to go right down to lens corrections. I'm going to remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. So it came up with the correct lens, and we're all set to go there. We're going to jump up to the basic panel. Now it's a little underexposed. You might jump right in and turn exposure up. Typically, I won't. I'll do the highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, tone curve, all that first to see how that affects exposure. Because quite often, when you adjust those, it'll correct the exposure for you, and you don't have to worry about the exposure slider. Now, another question I often get is, especially when I use these plugins and it creates that TIFF file, how much processing do I want to actually do to the raw file compared to the TIFF file? Well, I want to do as much as possible to the raw file. And there's two things that really only could be done to the raw file: white balance and camera profile. If you don't do those to the raw file, they get baked into that TIFF file. Whatever those settings were will get baked into the TIFF file, and you won't be able to change them. So at the very least, always make sure that you do white balance, camera profile, which is down here, right here. You want to do that in the raw file. Now, I like to do anything that has to do with the tonal values of the image in the raw file too. And when I say tonal values, a lot of people get confused what I mean by that. That means how bright it is, the different tonal values, shades of gray from black to white and everything in between. So highlight, shadows, whites, blacks. I want to make sure I try to do those to the raw file. That isn't quite as critical as those other two, but I do personally like to do those in the raw file. So you'll see I'll do all that, and we'll see if we're going to send this over to a plugin for the noise or not. So we're going to right away now, this is counterintuitive. I'm going to bring highlights down. And I'm bringing highlights down. You can see that actually looks pretty good, but I'm going to bring highlights down because I'm going to bring shadows up. We're going to be flattening everything out. And then we're going to add contrast to the image. And when I add contrast to the image, it's going to make the highlights a little brighter, and it's going to make the shadows a little darker to give you contrast. So we're going to flatten out this image by taking highlights all the way down and shadows all the way up. That isn't a formula, that's just how it worked out for this image. Looks okay. Now I'm going to skip whites and blacks for now. I'm going to go to vibrance, and I'm going to bring vibrance up to just 10. I don't want to go too crazy with color. As a matter of fact, I'm going to leave it at 5. It looks very colorful to me. It might be too colorful, but we'll see in a minute. We're going to jump down to the tone curve, and I think it's just going to need medium contrast. See, that even added a lot of contrast. Yeah, we'll stay with medium contrast. Now you can see what I mean, that it's still pretty dark. Now let's see what our white and black adjustments will do to the image. We still might have to affect exposure. I don't know yet. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and I'm going to double click on the word whites. And you can see that brightened it up nicely. We're going to hold the Shift key in and double click on the word blacks. And that brought it down just a little. All right, now I think that's bright enough. I don't think we have to affect exposure at all. But if you can't see it, there is a ton of noise. All right, you see this noise up in here? A lot. We're going to deal with that in a bit. To me, though, it's too colorful. So I'm going to double click on the word vibrance to put that back at 0. It still didn't do much. Every now and then you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to take a little color out of the shot. Now, in this reason, I think why it's so colorful is it was slightly underexposed and the colors got shifted for some reason or another, and they're just, when you really bring up the brightness of the image, it just got too colorful. Like that isn't realistic. You know, the lion I don't think is that colorful. The grass isn't that colorful. So we're gonna go to saturation. We're just gonna suck some of the color out of this. Minus 10, it still might be a touch. Minus 15, maybe just a little bit colorful. I don't know, minus 16. Let's just leave it there. I think that's okay. It still might be a little bit too colorful, um, you know, almost, painterly looking, but I don't know. It's still bothering me a little. All right, I think minus 20, the lion looks a little more realistic. I like that. So we're going to put the saturation at minus 20. No vibrance, no clarity yet. Clarity and tell you the truth, contrast probably, but clarity especially, stuff like that you could do to the TIFF file that you would create if you send it to a plugin, especially a plugin for noise. Clarity is not going to make much of a difference. Sharpening and detail, anything in the detail panel won't make much of a difference if you're working on the raw file or the TIFF file. The main thing about the raw file, again, is white balance and the camera profile. Those are the two most important things. Then after that, for me, I like to work on anything that has to do with tonal values. And then clarity, stuff like that, I'll do to the TIFF file later. Now, I think I'm going to send this to a plugin for the noise. But before I do that, as I look at it now, and it's kind of like at its correct brightness level, the crop is okay. I like how she framed it. It's not really rule of thirds or anything like that. It's a portrait of a lion. And typically when you take a portrait, you bullseye the portrait, right? It's right in the middle. So you don't really have to worry about it. But what she did do, the lion is slightly facing this way to our right. So the larger empty part of the frame is to the lion's right. So that looks good. I think though this foreground stuff, there's just a little bit too much there. I don't think it's balanced vertically. It visually balanced vertically. Now that's a very subjective statement, all right? But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to the crop tool, and I think I'm just going to pull it in a little bit over there. So we still have the larger open part of the screen over here. Also, over here is the cat's back paw is kind of coming in. I'm not sure if I could actually get rid of that. maybe like that. Let's click enter. Okay, I like that crop better. So we still have a large open part of the frame over here, and that is kind of where the cat is facing. The cat, of course, the head is kind of tilted towards us, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. So I kind of like this processing. To me, it still might be a little bit too colorful. All right, I know I'm obsessing with this, but I'm just going to pull it down a little more. Yeah, I think that's a little better. A lot of times when you're photographing animals, unless you're doing something very artistic, you want the colors to be as close to natural as possible. Especially if if you're shooting, of course, if you're lucky enough to shoot and talented enough to shoot for National Geographic, they have to be natural. You can't make it something it isn't. All right. So, all right, there we are. There. Um, Now, if I were to do noise reduction in Lightroom, I mean, it's going to be hard to do. You'd have to really pull this way up. Now, again, I hope you could see this. That did actually a pretty good job. Yeah, see how it softened the lion so much though? I mean, that's like there's before and there's after. I mean, that just isn't acceptable. Now we come to the detail slider in the noise reduction sub-tab of the detail tab. If I push that to the right, you will hopefully bring back some of that detail. And you can see we did bring back some, right? There's before and there's after. So that's the way you would go about it. You would bring the luminance slider up, try to obliterate the noise. Then if you want to rescue any detail, you would bring this detail slider to the right to rescue detail. The contrast slider usually does little. It's just gonna add a little contrast, supposedly, um, in the spots that it thinks would help the image with the noise. So I don't know how to explain it. If you have a noise a speck here and it's light and all around it's black, when you move the contrast slider, it's actually going to try to make those more even so that it doesn't look as obvious. So actually, it's in that case it would remove some contrast. So you very rarely will see that contrast slider do much. There's no color noise surprisingly in here. You'd get little like colorful dots in the image, and you would move that slider to the right and then rescue detail again with that detail slider. So I don't think I have to do anything there. Now, I would bring sharpening up to try to sharpen our mighty beast. And you could still, it looks very painterly, doesn't it? And that is partly because there is a lot of noise in the image. So that's how you would go about doing this detail panel in um, in Lightroom. I'm going to reset it back to its defaults. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take sharpening slider right down to 0. So I'm going to send this over to a plugin to deal with this noise. So I'm going to right click on the image itself. I'm just going to go down to edit in, and we're going to go down to Topaz Denoise 6. Let's see, we'll click at it. We're doing the TIFF file now. So I did all the important adjustments that I feel are important to the raw file. And as I mentioned, that clarity and sharpness we could add later to the TIFF file. It won't make much of a difference. Now there was a considerable part of noise over in here. All right, now let's see. We're using a Canon EOS 70D, so we have to go to this drop down and pick Canon. Now, what I found with the presets that are available here for the Canon and Nikon cameras, they're pretty much the full frame cameras. They don't have any preset usually for any crop sensor cameras. In this case, they have a power shot, which is a crop sensor camera. All right, it was ISO 3200. Let's just try ISO 1600. And it barely did anything. We'll go to ISO 3200. Now, of course, this is a different camera. All right, I'm just doing this to see. ISO 3200, I mean, did pretty good. Got rid of a lot of noise. Go to this add grain slider, and I'm going to take that down to 0. Okay, it really didn't do much there. Now, you could see this little pixelizations in here. That's you know, we're trying to recover detail, and that's what happens. You'll get those. If those bother you with this, you would take this recover detail slider to the left, and it would tend to get rid of those, but you would lose some of your detail in your lion. So it's the trade-off. This was a very noisy image, so I'm going to just run with it the way it is here, and I'm going to accept these pixelizations over here, and then maybe I could obscure those with a vignette or something. So we're going to click OK, and it's going to then add this to the image. It's going to bring us back over to Lightroom, of course, and then we'll continue our processing, and we're almost done. So I know I blabbed a lot in this video. I tried to cover some of the common questions I've been receiving after almost every video I post. So I hope that gives you my viewpoint in processing and how I go about doing things. And again, I want to stress that nothing is written in stone. This isn't processing. Post-processing is really, very subjective, and this is a way for you to really express yourself too. Not only taking the image, but post-processing the image. All right, so it should blink a couple times. It looks like it's not gonna. When it doesn't blink, we're going to come with that error like we did last time. It just takes a second for the error to show. Sometimes if you click off it and then back on it, it's not doing it now. See, the noise is still here, so it did not. I don't know what to say if it did not work. Now when I go over to the library module, it looks like it's been applied. But when I go to, there we go. We're back in the develop module, and you can see we have this little error, this little warning down here. We got that last episode too. You'll get that quite often. We'll click on that, and we're going to import settings from disk. I explained this in the last episode. And there we go. Now we have our noise reduced image. There's the original image. And if we want to compare the two, we'll just select both of them. We'll hit the C key on the keyboard. Shift tab. All right, here's the original raw image that was processed to that point. Then we sent it over to Topaz Denoise, and here is our noise reduced image. Now, sitting in front of my, whatever this is, 27-inch iMac, I could see the difference. But if I zoom in, I don't know, in the video, you could see that there's a lot less noise over here than there is over here. It is softer in here. At least it appears to be softer in here. Okay, so there is trade-offs always when you do this stuff. Oops, pardon me. All right, so with that said, we now have our TIFF file. Let's continue our processing. Right away, I'm going to go down to detail, and I'm going to sharpen the image. And I'm going to bring sharpening pretty high. See what we got. Well, maybe too high, but I'm going to leave it at 100. We'll go up to the basic panel, and I am going to go to clarity. You know, clarity gives you the effect that things look sharper. We'll bring that up to 20. Now you can see that this up in here where there was tons of noise, how that looks kind of stretchy, like a stretch marks almost. So we're going to deal with that in a second. I'm not sure how, but we'll figure something out. So I got clarity at 30. I kind of like that. And let's go back down to detail. We'll zoom in. Still a little bit painterly looking, but there was a lot of noise in the image, so we get what we get, you know. You can't usually create something that isn't there. Their detail isn't there. You could enhance whatever detail's left, but you're not going to create any new detail. So I'm going to leave sharpening at 80 because it doesn't seem to do much between 80 and 100. I'm going to leave that like that, kind of like that. Now we're going to go to effects. We're going to put on a dark vignette. This will help hide it over here a little bit. And it's way higher than I normally put it. As you can see, it's at minus 32. The other thing you could do is you could get a graduated filter, reset it by double clicking on effect. Let's bring exposure down a touch, and you could just come over here like that. Kind of vignette it that way a little bit. I don't know. Something like that, I guess. Yeah, we'll just leave it there. Yeah, I think that helps. So we kind of pretty much have the face of the lion pretty well lit. We have everything else around the lion pretty dark. This really isn't my style, to tell you the truth. When I do any wildlife photography, even zoo photography, I tend to not do something like this where you have just like the face of the lion like kind of showing through and everything else is very dark. I know a lot of people do this, and there's a couple people I follow on Instagram that do this, and they take beautiful, beautiful shots. It's just something I typically won't do, but I did here because I think it was needed because all the noise that was in the image, and we're going to try to we had to get rid of that noise. At least I felt I had to get rid of that noise, and then I left behind some artifacts that I have to obscure with this vignette. At least that's my feeling. So that's it for this image. Thank you, Beverly, for sharing it with us. If you want to see, we're going to reset this one, and we'll get those, and we'll compare these. Here, let's do it this way. There we go. Hit C, and then we'll get rid of those sides. And there's the original shot. Here is our processed image. And again, this isn't something I would do. So if you go to my Instagram, you'll never see a shot like this or anything like that. But I think that was the best way to do this particular image, given the amount of noise that was in there. You could go the whole different direction. You could process it and enhance the noise, embrace the noise, maybe, and that would work for you. It just wouldn't work for me, I don't think. So I chose to go this route. And again, I don't do these ahead of time and plan how I'm going to do it. You were with me as I was going through it with my thought processes and the way I was thinking about processing it. So I hope that gives you a little more insight in at least what I think about and how I go about things. So, Beverly, thank you again for sharing your image with us. Thank you, everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.